We will be spending the next few minutes discussing API Construction's welding procedure and requirements. API primarily welds using SMAW in its construction processes. The majority of API's welding is sheet steel to sheet steel. Therefore, API primarily uses AWS D1.3 sheet steel welding code as our standard for welding. It is important to know this, as the requirements of D1.3 are different than that of D11, as we are not performing structural welding. Having said that, all welders working for API are required to qualify to our field welding procedure. In addition to qualifying, continuity logs must be updated every 6 months to keep the qualification active. The qualification tests consist of welding a 12-gauge aluminized steel plate to a 14-gauge aluminized steel plate. Welders shall submit 2 coupons in each of the following positions: vertical up, vertical down, and overhead. As shown in this diagram, coupons may be tack welded together on the sides only. You will then place a fillet weld on one side of the joint using E7018 3/32 inch rod. The weld must be a minimum of 1 inch long, and note that the entire length of the weld is subject to a visual and destructive test. Do not brush the aluminized coating on the coupon before welding. It is, however, required to chip and brush the weld before submitting for testing. In addition, the welder's name, employee number, and weld position shall be clearly marked on each coupon. Qualification allows welders to weld sheet steel less than 1/4 inch thick, no greater than 3/32, to other sheet steel or thicker structural members. As a rule, the minimum weld length for attaching APICC components is 3/4 inch long. Your foreman will direct you if there are other specific size requirements for the project you are working on. Each weld electrode has its own specific storage and use requirements. Here at API, we primarily utilize an E7018H or E7018H4R low hydrogen electrode for most of our welding. This rod is usable out of the rod oven for up to 9 hours. Any rod outside the oven for longer than 9 hours needs to be destroyed properly. The rod can be returned to the oven provided it has done so under this time frame. Rod ovens for this electrode shall maintain a temperature between 250 and 325 degrees Fahrenheit. If portable rod ovens are used, ensure that they remain plugged in once you arrive at your workplace and during production. The D13 code says a weld shall be acceptable by visual inspection. API requires that its welders inspect 100% of their own work during production. An API-trained and certified weld inspector will then verify and inspect 10% of the project's welds. It is important to note the criteria for acceptable welds. Firstly, the weld profile must be consistent and a minimum of 1/8 inch diameter. The welds shall have no cracks, shall be of proper length, shall not exhibit any undercutting of the base metals, shall fuse properly both base metals, and shall not burn or melt through any of the substrate. General preheat requirements are as follows. If base metal temperatures are colder than 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the metals are between 1/8 inch and 3/4 inch thickness, they shall be preheated to a minimum of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 inches either side of the weld, and that temperature maintained while welding. Additionally, the metal shall be preheated if there is any moisture present. Because the SMAW process does not use a gas shield, it is not affected by wind. This is because in stick welding, the flux coats the rod and actually acts as the shield to the filler metal. When welding, the filler metal always melts inside the flux coating. The welding code prohibits welding in the rain unless sheltered and if the ambient temperature is less than 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Welding is an important part of our construction process, and it is important that we maintain a high level of quality. Poor welds will not be acceptable to API construction. We appreciate your attention in this regard, and remember, if you have a question, your foreman and your superintendent is your best resource.